Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Microsoft Purview. Hope you are all staying safe and healthy. My name is Noor Basha, Marketing Director at Windwire Technologies, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. As you all know, today's topic for the webinar is Democratize Your Enterprise Data with Microsoft Purview. In the next 45 minutes, what we will do is we will learn how Microsoft Purview establishes effective data governance processes to maximize the business value of data. Before we start, let me quickly highlight few housekeeping items. So we are recording this webinar and we will send out the recording in next 24 to 48 hours. During the webinar, please feel free to post questions and we will try to answer them as many as we can at the end of the session. Now with that, let me take this opportunity to introduce to today's speakers. So I have Pandian Muneshwar, who heads our data and AI practice at Windwire Technologies. And he brings our extensive experience in helping our enterprise customers migrate, modernize, and govern data landscape on Microsoft Azure. We also have Carrie from Microsoft, who is the program manager, and he brings close to 17 years experience in the analytics and big data space. Carrie is responsible for spearheading customer engagement to empower customers' ability to manage their data estate using Microsoft Purview. His key focus has been on the disciplines of analytics, including data governance and how organizations use data and analytics to create business value. Good morning, Carrie, and good morning, Pandian. Welcome to today's webinar. We would like to hear more from you on the Purview. Before we start, let me quickly publish a poll that audience can take, and from there, Carrie will take over the session. So we will have maybe quick 30 minutes for people to take the poll. Great. Few more seconds. Perfect. Thanks a lot for taking time to answer the poll. So with that, let me hand it over to Carrie to take the session from here. And please feel free to post any questions you have in the chat window, and we will take them at the end of the session. Thank you, and Carrie, over to you.
All right, thanks, Noor. Great to be here, everybody. Thanks for taking time to spend with us today to learn a little bit about Microsoft Purview and Windwire and the work that they've done around Purview to help companies implement and utilize it in their data governance journeys. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So just kind of touch briefly on this real fast. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but one thing we want to talk about here is the momentum that Microsoft Purview's been. We've been actually GA'd on the catalog product for about 7 months now. And in the last quarter, right, we actually, there are over 5,000 accounts on Purview. So those are catalogs that companies and organizations classified over 90 billion assets in the last quarter alone. Or actually, sorry, discovered 90 billion assets in the last quarter alone. Next slide, please. So this slide won't come as a shock to anybody, right, that's working in the data space. Data governance challenges, are across a complex data estate, and they've even become more complex, right, in the last 5 to 7 years. We've always had the data silos around flat files, data warehouses, information in Microsoft documentation, emails, different formats, different places. And now we get to couple all of that information with the fact that we also now have edge devices, right? IoT of things feeding us information. we have our existing data centers, and we have, cross-cloud information. So we have, the Azure, the AWS, Google Cloud Functions, as well as, SaaS services like Snowflake, Cassandra, et cetera, that run across those different platforms. So again, right, instead of making data governance simpler, right, as we've evolved to the multi-cloud strategies, it actually has become more complex. So the big question we want to ask ourselves is, how can we balance, right, being able to utilize this information to create business value and answer business questions, while ensuring that we're utilizing and that we're using the data appropriately, right? So that we are adhering to the guardrails around compliance and in company policies. Next slide, please. So one thing I'm going to touch on real fast on this, we're going to focus this conversation on what was formerly known as Azure Purview, right, which is now Microsoft Purview Unified Data Governance. And again, this is focused on the data governance perspective. We'll talk about this in a moment, but we also are combining, right? We're in the process of rebranding what was formerly known as the Microsoft 365 Compliance, which is around risk and compliance around document-based assets, and incorporating that with what, again, was formerly Azure Purview around data assets, and then combining those informations. And we'll go through this. The first step in that integration is around information protection labels, and that we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But we'll continue to build out the applications that were formerly for the document systems, right, around risk and compliance, to being able to use those in your data systems as well. Next slide, please. Cool. So this is the slide for Microsoft Purview, right? This is the unified data governance view. Again, the main thing here is that we actually building this out in conversation with the marketplace and with our own self, right? So Microsoft, we utilize Purview in our own data governance journey. One thing that we noticed, right, that was very common is that we had multiple copies of the metadata to support different tools, right? So data cataloging, data transformation, ETL pipe management, doing data quality or doing classification of information or privacy of information. So even if you were using this some cases from the same company, right, you still had to stitch all these applications together because they didn't actually have a common platform. So that was the one aspect for us we wanted to make certain that we did, was a common platform around this that feeds information. And again, we understand the technical metadata. So where is the data coming from? So which data source, which server, which database, which file container, et cetera. Where is that data moving throughout the system? So lineage, right? What type of information? What's the context of that data? Classification. And then again, also business context, which is around classifications, glossary assignments, and the sensitivity labels. So all of this functions come through. We built this data map as our founding, right, as our... For this perspective. Oops, sorry, my computer is taking a moment. But we wanted to also then expose this information for different applications across the top. So the first application we'll talk about and we'll focus mainly on is the data catalog. This data catalog is the human interaction, right, with the data map, where we build out information that allows users, both your data source administrators, to register information and quickly grab it, your data stewards or data owners to actually curate the information throughout the system, and then your consumers to be able to find this information, understand, what's in it, what's its context, and who's it's associated with. In addition, I'm just going to run through these other pillars kind of really fast, is we also are building out additional capabilities in the governance space, right? So the first one will be data sharing, or not the first one, but the first one we talk about here is data sharing. That one is in private preview as we speak, and is targeted for public preview in the summer, the mid-summer timeframe, so in July. And that will allow your users, right, consumers, to find information inside the platform, and if they're authorized, they can then share that information with other people inside and outside of your organization in a controlled and recorded fashion. Next one, data quality, and we'll talk a little bit more about data quality in just a second as one of the pillars that we're also building out. This one's also in private preview, and we'll talk about that. And for data quality, for us, kind of encompasses three areas that we'll look at, right? The first area is profiling. So what is in the data, right? So what's its, typically you'll find min-max, standard deviation, heuristic distribution, etc. of the data. So what's the profile of the information in there, as well as assessments, which allow us to understand how well does this data fit your business needs, right? So the organizations can build their own assessment rules and, assess if that information fits their objectives or not. Master data is an area that Microsoft, you'll notice it's in a slightly different color. This is the one area that Microsoft has elected to take a partner first approach on, right? For every other pillar, we'll take a partner approach that allows us to extend or accelerate our reach. But in master data, we've actually taken a partner first approach. And the two partners right now that already have GA interoperations with us are Prophecy and Clued-In, and we're in testing out the integrations with Tamr and Samarkey. So again, we can work through those. And yes, they are separate systems, but as I said, our goal, right, one of our underlying principles is that we have a common platform. So we're working with these partners where they actually read the data from our data map, right? So they understand where data is coming from, the context of that information. And when they publish their master or reference records, they're published back to the data map. So your consumers can also be aware of those reference information. The data use governance is the next pillar. And there's two major areas underneath this use governance function for us. The first one is the insights, and insights actually drive how are people interacting with your data catalog, right? So that's the main function. It will include, as we move forward, it will also include the other pillars as they progress and move out of private preview to public preview into GA. But the first one is around insights of how people are interacting with your data catalog and how well is your data catalog being curated. The next piece of the data use governance, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well, is in the data access control or data policies. And we'll talk about that as a little more extensive in just a moment. That will go through the capabilities that we're developing in the access control. And the youngest of these pillars that we're building out is the data privacy. And the data privacy for us the first MVP for us will include three major functions: data subject access rights, consent management, and automated assessment. So you'll be able to import and tailor assessment templates to determine how well your data and business processes are matching against a compliance like GDPR as an example. Purview and Microsoft will not tell you that you are or not compliant with GDPR, but based on the assessment rules that you can incorporate, you'll be able to determine for yourself, right, how compliant you are or not with that system. And again, one of the things, if you look at the very bottom, right, not to kind of go through this, we wanted to go across these different systems. We apply each of these platforms across the different systems. So as the data map and data catalog have gone GA, we've continued to expand them across the Microsoft data sources as well as other data sources in the industry. And the same thing will happen in the other pillars, right? We will start in the Microsoft Azure services space, and we will build out from there. Next slide, please. So the data access policies, I just want to spend a few moments on this, kind of going through this. One of the main things about this is that this gives you a centralized way to author and manage policies across different platforms. So again, as we talked about, we're going to start in the Azure services space in this arena. But what this allows us to do, it's a little hard to see in the slide there, but we'll kind of go through it, is it allows us to say, the policy is going to say, I want to take an effect. So what do I want to do? Do I want to read? Do I want to write? I want to allow or deny. And then I want to allow it to do something against what? An action, a read, a write, a modify. For what, right? For which data? And the current system we have right now, we call it asset-based. So it's specifically, I want to allow read of data in table X for group 1, right, to these subjects. So again, you get to write that across the different systems and work through that. And that's in public preview as we speak. The next thing that we'll release in the data access policy, which will bring more of the power, is in the data resources. Instead of having to do it as an asset based, you'll be able to do it as an attribute based, right? So data attribute. And that will allow us to say, I want to allow group X to read data that's marked as PII, right? So, and therefore the Microsoft Purview system will translate where all the PII data is stored based on the data map. And again, then for us, that will allow us to drive through the different platforms and see the information. So Microsoft Purview will actually determine, right, again, based on classifications, where the data resides. Again, for the Azure-based services, we will author those policies down to those native systems for native enforcement. So this, again, gives you a web-based function to work through the system. And then again, you can write different policies, right? Only Microsoft FTEs can read highly sensitive data. That's an attribute based. Only Azure FTEs can read Azure customer support data. That's a specific asset, right? And when we get to the future, we'll be able to do things like, for policies, we'll also be able to do data sharing policies. So like ACR data cannot be shared outside of Microsoft, right? So that's a coming future functionality. All right, next slide, please. So the other one we'll talk a little bit more in depth about here is the data quality assessments. So again, we talked about the fact that the initial function, this is in private preview. So again, these are two major areas that we're building out in the Purview system that will begin to really differentiate from just the catalog capabilities truly to being a unified data governance platform. So the first was the policies, now the quality. So again, we'll be able to actually write rules that determines how well the data meets our business objectives. It's a little hard to see from the slide, but I know you can see it, is the fact that you can run this over time. So these can be run on demand or scheduled. And then over time, you can see how well your data quality has progressed for the specific asset against the specific rules that we have. We'll generate a remediation file that allows you to go understand where the data, which data assets didn't actually meet the mark, and how to move them forward. And then the other big thing, again, right, this is all built on a common data map. So this data quality is attributes, right, of the data assets, just like the other metadata and other business context. So it's not a separate system, right? We get to integrate these into the platform, and that's the major focus on this, right, is that, again, that common platform across the system and developing applications across the top. Next slide. So that wraps us up for Purview, right? We're not going to go into real depth on that, right? Obviously, you guys can find information on the Microsoft document websites, and also search for Microsoft Purview Governance. You'll find additional information. Now what I'd like to do is actually turn this over to Pandian, the leader for Windwire. But first, I want to kind of give just a little bit of the explanation, right? Why we're doing this together is that Windwire, is a Microsoft managed partner. They were a finalist in the 2021 Microsoft Partner of the Year awards in both the healthcare and the app modernization space, right? And so Windwire also helps companies bring together technology and business expertise, right, to help come with a specific offering around the Purview system. And they call this, their offering around data governance, Democratize, right? And what this helps actually people do is understand both the business objectives, the technical objectives, and how then to use those together to implement and adopt the Microsoft Purview system in a rapid fashion. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Pandian to talk about the Windwire process and how it can be utilized to help you in your Purview in your data governance journey.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So now we'll specifically look at to implement Azure Purview, Microsoft Purview platform. What are things to be looked at, right? So we can broadly look at it into three terms. One is how to scope the work, right? So what are the items should I actually start building as part of my Purview implementation? That's the scope of work. The next thing is, for me to do a successful implementation, what are the considerations to be looked at? So that's the second part. And third part is, I have defined the scope, I've looked at the considerations. Now, what are the different phases in the implementation? So we look at in these three aspects for us to understand how to go about implementing Purview. When it comes to the scope of work, we can broadly classify into 5 areas. So if we can have answers to these 5 areas, then we'll be in a good state to define the scope of work for implementing Purview, right? So one is for which business function. So am I going to implement Purview? So is it going to be the marketing or supply chain? Which business function I'm going to enable with Purview, right? And the second part is, within the business function, what are the applications which are going to be my data source? Do they have a SAP system? Do they have a data analytics platform? Is it on ADLS, Synapse, right? So basically understanding the data landscape within the business function, which will help me in data mapping, right? So now I've understood the business function, what applications I'm going to look at. The third is, who are my consumers of my Purview platform, right? So in what forms of data I have to deliver? What are the data sets which I have to create, right? So and in what language will it be easy for them to consume, right? And for that I need to do some amount of profiling of the users who is going to consume, right? And the fourth part, which is very critical for a governance engagement, is to define an operating model, right? So when I have to define an operating model, the key inputs which I need to identify beforehand is, who are my stakeholders, who are the data owners, what is the process for resolving a data issue identified, who will help in the resolution process, right? So for these things to be defined, it's very critical for me to understand the stakeholders, data owners, and the key SMEs who will actually help in the resolution process. So if I can have those information, then I will be able to define an operating model. And now the other thing which you have to look at is, I have built the Purview platform, but what kind of information I want to share it with my stakeholders, right? Or for the IT team or the business team, right? So certain things you would have got as part of your user community, what kind of data they need, right? But the insight is more in terms of for them to understand what is available in my system, or giving them alerts in terms of what is getting uploaded right now, or helping them understand the stakeholders, what are the PI data which is currently present in the system, or who is consuming statistics in terms of who is consuming the data, right? So insights is in terms of how Purview is being leveraged, or how I can further maximize the platform, right? So the insights on that is what the fifth part is. So if I could answer all of these five questions, right, then basically I would have been in a position to define the scope of work for my Purview implementation, right? So now we've defined the scope. I'm ready to implement I'm ready to get started on the implementation, right? But before getting into the implementation phase, based on the experience, we have actually kind of identified 6 specific areas which we need to actually do a next level of detailing, so to ensure that we are able to have a hold on the 6 areas, right? So these 6 areas, I do have a detailing on each of this, what it is, but to broadly look at, is the business team onboarded in the implementation process, right? So that's one critical thing. The other thing is, do I have a data quality framework process in place which will ensure that my attributes which I'm getting into the Purview platform as that additional tagging of the data quality information, do I have that in place? And especially a Purview kind of platform implementation becomes successful only when your business starts using it, right? And integrating Purview with other business friendly applications or business focused applications, especially master data management or any data delivery platform. Like in data delivery, it could be Azure Data Share. If such applications are there in your landscape, ensure those are getting integrated into the Purview implementation, because that will ensure that the business which is using the data share or data delivery platform MDM naturally get aligned with the Purview platform as well, right? The other thing is, for the governance platform, it's critical for us we have the right glossary definitions which will ensure that business and IT are able to collaborate effectively. So what is the source of my glossary? So that's something which has to be looked at Because these are things which will ensure that as part of the Purview implementation, the success factor in terms of getting more users onboarded will be possible when you have the right glossary, right? And the other thing which we'll have to look for is with the understanding of the data landscape. Let's say we spoke about you have SAP, you have Salesforce, or you have Teradata. We need to understand, are there situations, scenarios where I need to build custom scanners? So we'll talk about it later as well. So we need to have visibility in terms of, am I going to build custom scanners, right? So if that's the case, then that will also help me addressing that, how I'm going to handle it will ensure that my implementation is successful. And Azure Catalog is another aspect which needs to be looked at, especially if you have implemented it, whether anything can be leveraged from Azure Catalog, right? So all these 6 things is something which you'll have to evaluate, understand before you get to the implementation phase. But all 6 may not be relevant to all of the enterprise which is looking at, right? So for example, if they don't have an MDM application, then that may not be relevant. Or if they haven't implemented Azure Catalog, that may not be relevant. But the aspect is look at all these 6 things, because each of these 6 actually can play a role in the success of the Purview implementation. And when we say success, it's basically onboarding business users to consume the platform, right? So now let's look at each of this consideration in detail in terms of what it is and how does it add value, right? First consideration which we want to look at, which is very critical for any governance platform, is the data quality, right? Do I have a data quality framework, right? So for this question, there could be only two situations or scenarios, right? Either you have a strong data quality process in place as part of your data lake or a data landscape, in which case the effort required is, what are the metrics present? Do I need to enhance with any additional metrics and bring those metrics into the Purview platforms? That's the effort required. The second situation could be you don't have a data quality framework in place, or probably you have something which is not efficient enough to give a lot of details, right? In that case, you will have to build a new data quality framework. And what we recommend is start building that using an Azure Data Factory and Azure Databricks, right? And take an approach where you are able to bring in a schema agnostic design, wherein your whole file structure or table structure is completely parameterized. You have inventory of data quality checks which can be then parameterized, customized. So the focus is to ensure that you're able to build a generic framework which can be leveraged for running and choosing the required data quality checks, right, from the pre-built components, right? So and which can give you the required metrics which can be made integrated into Purview platform. So it's very critical that a strong data quality framework is present, because this is what will give you confidence to the business in terms of what data is available, how good it is, and whether it can be consumed, right? So this is on an important consideration for success of Purview implementation. And now we want to specifically look at the integration aspect, right? So I think when we spoke about integration, we mentioned about 2 things. One is data delivery, and which is what we're going to talk right now. So when I say data delivery from the Azure services context, it can be Azure data share, right? Which helps you deliver data. Or if you could actually have even a custom solution like a data hub, which helps you share files or deliver data within internal or externally, right? So the key aspect is ensuring such applications integrated within Purview is very critical. And with the current Purview roadmap, there's a much more stronger integration of data share, and becomes very critical that we bring in this aspect into the Purview implementation. So the advantage is Purview will be able to give you the information on what sources, what data elements are available in my source system, which will be brought into the Purview, right? You could see this arrow here. And then data share basically helps you get the information, what is being provided and what is consumed, right? And who is consuming the data, right? This information it can be brought into Purview. And with this, what happens is I could be able to put a end-to-end lineage for a given product data in SAP or Oracle, right? Who is consuming the data, in what format it's getting consumed. I could get the complete lineage. So the complete lineage in terms of the source and the delivery mechanism and the consumer is completely available for me to understand. And the other information which I can also get is, since I'm going to have all my source system data in Purview, if I can actually enhance this data share also in terms of what is more information available. There could be other systems which are having an extended product information which is not being delivered in data share. So I could also give such insights by bringing these and identifying such gaps and making it available for the data share implementation as well, improving the data share implementations, right? So, and the other thing which we really spoke about, right? Data share or delivery platforms are the platforms which are very closely used by the business team. So once you bring in this integration, the onboarding of business also becomes very much easier, right? The other integration aspect is on the MDM platform. Here again, the MDM platform could be of any you could have done an Informatica MDM implementation or other platforms as well, or IBM, right? But the aspect is whatever those platforms are, we need to bring in those integration into the Purview platform, right? So here the example which we want to highlight is Proficiency specifically because to what Kerry was earlier highlighting, right? Proficiency is currently available as a generally available. So basically integration between Purview and Proficiency is currently available for you. Semaka is on the is under Purview, right? Let's say if you're using Informatica, the point is if it's not available out of the box for integration, we can actually help you build that integration so that the metadata available within MDM platform is brought into Purview for the full leverage, right? And for now talking specifically about Proficiency, which will be relevant for any MDM platform, this is a bidirectional integration. Basically, what happens is, as you could see in the diagram on the left-hand side, if the data modeler makes any changes in the modeling activity, let's say he's defining a new hierarchy for customer, right? He's creating a new hierarchy for the sales team. So that change will be immediately reflected in the governance layer of Proficiency and which will then reflect in the Purview. So any data model change done in Proficiency is getting reflected in the Purview. So that's where metadata flows from Proficiency into Purview, right? So there's the other use cases where the metadata can flow from Purview to Proficiency. So let's say the right-hand side diagram, right? So basically your LOB systems, the source systems, metadata is available in Purview system, right? So now let's say the data modeler wants to bring in additional data. So let's say he's already having product data. Now there's an R&D system which is actually coming with some product information, and that metadata is available in Purview, right? So they could actually pull this metadata from Purview. So now the metadata is flowing from Purview into Proficiency, which can be then modeled, right? So basically your business glossary definition and the metadata definition of this new, let's say R&D application product information can actually flow from here to Proficiency. So this kind of integration where your metadata flows from Proficiency to Purview or Purview to Proficiency, right? This complete lineage is available out of the box, right? But if it's an other MDM platform, we can actually build this as a custom integration so that the whole metadata flows between these two systems, right? And this again, to our earlier discussion, right? Master data management is a very closely operated platform along with the business team, right? And once you get this integration done, your business automatically gets into the Purview platform adoption, right? So this is also an important integration for ensuring your Purview is widely adopted by the business team. So now the third consideration which you want to look at is in terms of the business glossary, right? So for the business glossary to be brought into the Purview system, right? So we want to know what is the source of for the glossary, right? So if you have an ERP system, probably a starting point could be look at the glossary which you have customized as part of an ERP implementation. Can we take that glossary as one of the source? Or your system dictionary is already built, or you have some Erwin modeling tool which has some glossary. Those all can be starting points, right? Or you have catalog implementation done, that could be a starting point. Or look for some third-party curated glossary. In fact, at Windwire, we have specific glossary for the life science manufacturing retail industry, right? And we can bring in as part of our implementation, which can jumpstart your glossary building process. But the critical point is look for the source for the glossary to be built, right? And that will actually give a lot of jumpstart for in terms of how you can initiate discussion with SMEs. So basically, you can actually show them what is available and then customize it, make it more contextual to the business function, right? So this is also one of the, so understanding the source and references to glossary within your landscape will actually help the Purview implementations is much more effectively done, much more quicker. And the fourth thing which we want to look at is custom scanners. So the Purview platform, as part of its quarterly Purview or general available releases, there are a lot many things happening, right? So they give you a 6 months roadmap, which is visible to partners. So as part of that, if you see at this point, SAP ECC is available for generally available, Teradata is generally available, SAP HANA is available, BW is actually in Purview. Similarly, Snowflake is in Purview. Click and Tableau is expected in Q2 of this year, right? But certain scanners which are not available at this point of time, generally, you may still want to ensure that your system is end-to-end, and you may want to build that metadata integration or scanner component, right? So the option is Purview supports Atlas API, the Apache Atlas API, right? So for you to actually ensure that metadata from your source system, let's say Tableau, or in this case Salesforce, is brought into the Purview, that ingestion is done through using Atlas API, right? And this example, what you're seeing on screen, is one thing which we did for our customer, where they want to bring in the Salesforce metadata into Purview, right? And currently SFTC is in public preview, but at that point of time it was not available when we did early end of last year, right? So here though there was two options, we actually went with the Azure Data Factory option and then using Atlas API. So similarly, we need to understand within our data landscape, which I'm looking for a particular business function, what are my source systems and what is the current roadmap available in Purview, right? If it's available generally, then there is no issue. If it's not available, then I need to plan for me to build that Atlas API based ingestion process so that I can bring in the metadata from the external system which is not supported in the Purview platform. So especially if it's a critical system and if you're building for marketing team, then Salesforce becomes a very critical role, and we cannot say that we can do it after 3 months. So from that perspective, it's critical to understand is this criticality of the system in the whole business function, and having a focus on building it using Atlas API. So the other thing which we also want to look at is, especially if customers who have actually implemented Azure Catalog, right? If you actually brought in metadata from Azure Data Factory or Power BI into Azure Catalog, then getting them into Purview is not a challenge, because you would actually be able to rescan them and get the details, right? The challenge would be if you already set up some good amount of business glossary, right, integration which you have done, then how do you bring that into the Purview platform? At this point, there's no direct migration utility or approach for Purview from the Microsoft side, right? So what we are suggesting is, especially for business glossary, if you have spent a lot of effort, then we could actually help you build some extractor components which can then be brought into and imported to the Purview platform, especially for the glossary. And if you have some security process which has been defined, and if you want to kind of look at how that can be done, that's also an option to look at. How do you bring that into and if you have, let's say you have defined the curator, reader, admin kind of roles, how those things can be mapped to the Purview platform, right? So that's in those roles, and actually you have also newer roles now coming in, like policy manager. How those things can be done will be critical to understand from the existing Azure Catalog and map to Purview. So the point is, if you have done Azure Catalog implementation already, it's worth spending some time in evaluating what is important from there, which can be brought in, and what are those things which can actually be redone in the Purview platform. That difference has to be kind of visible to us to ensure that this also plays a critical role in the Purview implementation success. So the other thing which becomes critical if you're not able to define the value of governance to the business team, right? So what we suggest is two critical things. So one is for whichever business function you are looking at governance platform to be implemented, do a quick survey, understand the current data governance maturity, right? And we actually have a toolkit based on which is the widely used Stanford data governance framework, to give a scoring in terms of where your business function stands in terms of data governance maturity. So this is something for us to understand what's the current, how familiar they're with the data landscape. Do they understand what is data quality? Do they understand what is master data, right? Do they understand what is metadata? So that basically gives you an idea where's the current business function with respect to data governance maturity, right? Once we have that understanding, then we need to kind of suggest doing a design thinking workshop, right? So what happens is, basically we get into the roles, the shoes of the end user, and then try to look at how a data governance platform is going to help them in the day-to-day activity, right? If he's looking for some data access or look at the data definitions as part of certain decisions, right? Currently what he does, he talks to IT team, can that self-service, can that be made self-service? And because of that, how much of time he could save, right? So that kind of value proposition is something which we could do using design thinking approach. So once that value proposition is defined and it's kind of aligned with their maturity, with the knowledge of the maturity, then actually defining why the Purview is important for them and how it adds value to the day-to-day task is much more easier to define, right? And as part of this, it's also very important that we also understand the current literacy of the IT team or the business team and have start on the data literacy program also very initially, right? So data literacy program is not about just you are going live with the Purview implementation and post will go live, you are giving them training on how what the system is. It's not that, right? It's basically even during the evangelization process where you're going to talk about what is data governance. At that point of time, you need to kind of define, help them understand what is data governance, help them understand use cases, how others in the industry are using it. So right from the initial evangelization process, you have to look at data literacy as an important thing for the business team to understand how data governance will add value. And as we go through the whole implementation process, there will be another version of this program which will help them understand how to use the system and how it can play a role in their day-to-day activity, right? So data literacy is right from the evangelization phase, and it will actually transform to a more contextual training as part of the implementation once it's implemented, right? So I think now we looked at 6 areas of uh, 6 areas of consideration, 6 things to be looked at, right? So onboarding business team with that maturity, and then governance, data governance maturity, and then the design thinking workshop. And then we spoke about integration, which is the data share, MDM. And then we specifically spoke about this custom scanners. We just want to quickly look at this. Yeah, so these are the things which we looked at, right? So now these are the things which will help you ensure that your Purview implementation is successful, right? And then we also looked at the scope of work. How do I scope my work? Now we want to look at, with this understanding, how do I go ahead and start my execution phase, right? How do I go about, what's my roadmap? What are the different things which I have to do, right? So from that perspective, there are 4 different phases which Windwire is kind of looked at through experience for working with customers. So one is readiness assessment. The first step is to understand my data inventory, understand my maturity of data governance at this point of time. And what this phase does is, this phase will help you with the level 0 overall road implementation plan, and also a data governance maturity report, right? And with this, you should also be able to get an insight in terms of what are the business priorities, which is very important for me as part of my data domain, sub-data domain, which I will have to look for, which is critical, right? And based on need, a business case with TCO and ROI report also will be of critical output from this phase. And then 4 to 8 weeks duration is based on, looking at enterprise-wide or a specific business function. So that's the time frame which will determine whether it's 4 to what number of weeks within 4 to 8, right? The second, once we have done the readiness assessment, then the second phase is the operating model, right? So in data governance, defining the model in terms of who is going to own the data, who is going to approve the whole workflow, and understanding, especially with the Purview context, who is going to do the admin work for the source or the collection, who is going to be my curator, reader, policy manager. So those roles has to be defined, because only then the whole system comes into the whole development phase as well. So the defining the operating model is very critical as part of the second phase. And as part of the operating model, we need to also ensure that we define a pilot scope which kind of demonstrate how this whole model will operate, right? So in the second phase, we actually define the whole operating model structure as roles and responsibilities, and also a pilot scope in terms of an end-to-end, where I can, it could be a sub-data domain. Let's say within supply chain, I would be able to take an inventory data, right? And then look at, for that end-to-end, what are the data sets I'm going to look at, what assets I'm going to map, how I'm going to classify, and how I'm going to generate insight. That whole end-to-end has to be done, and which should be boxed activity. That's why foundation installation is shown as a 4 weeks activity. Within the 4 weeks, what use case I can take, or data set subdomain I can take, and I can demonstrate the end-to-end life chain, right? So that the users see the full life cycle of how Purview can add value to them. Once that is done, then we get into the full-fledged onboarding waves where I start adding each data domain or sub-data domain into my Purview platform, right? So this foundation solution becomes the foundation blocks for you to get in the onboarding waves. So just to kind of summarize, this Purview adoption roadmap, readiness assessment gives you the governance maturity level 0 plan, TCO business case document, and then the operating model, which defines the governance model, the roles and responsibilities, pilot scope, and the foundation solution actually demonstrates to one end-to-end lineage business glossary, how it can be accessed, how it can be searched, that is available for a one subdomain of data, which is the pilot solution. And you would actually start the data literacy program also as part of this phase, right? And then move to the onboarding waves where it could be a 4 weeks per wave or 2 weeks per week based on the size of data which we are looking at, data set which we are looking at. But this should be an iterative where we actually were able to do it every 4 weeks. We're able to move certain things into production, and we're able to onboard users, right? So with this, I've kind of covered what are the different phases. Before going into this, Noor, you want to kind of open up that poll, Noor?
Thanks, Pandian. I've just launched the poll. Let audience take quick 30 seconds to answer the poll before we move into the next section. Great. Few more seconds. Cool. Let's get going, Pandian. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to kind of share thoughts in terms of what are the leads for you to look at to build a business case of Purview, or how leads can help you identify Purview can solve this problem, right? So if your current onboarding of IT or business teams takes 4 weeks and you want to bring down to 2 weeks, or it takes 2 weeks and you want to bring it down to 1 week, and that challenge can be resolved by bringing in Purview platform, right? And or you have data lake platform in place, and you have 20% of the users using the platform, and you want to increase it to 40% or 50%. You want to double the user consumption of the data. Then again, Purview is the platform which can help you do that, right? You have a lot of data issues being reported by the business, and the IT team spends a lot of time on that. Again, that kind of issue can be handled better if you have a Purview platform, right? You have a data science team which is keeping on sending you requests for data. They ask you for data sets to be provisioned to them, right? So you can move to a self-service model by having a data governance platform. So these are some of the example scenarios. When you hear about this, or when you're going through this process, Purview is the right solution which can help you solve those things, right? So now we also want to talk about a specific customer success story, right? This is a global retail firm based out of US. Their data landscape was it's a huge firm, so the data landscape had a variety of data applications. So they had SAP, they had Hadoop, they had Teradata, and they also had the data model being managed on Irvine platform, right? So the key challenge was for them the inventory data, which was going out to the suppliers, merchants, and partners, were not uniform, and it varied based on region and local and location, right? So there were a lot of confusion back and forth and delays in the inventory replenishment. So, and this was to be addressed, right? So basically the data sharing with merchant suppliers and partners was a challenge. So the thought behind this problem to be solved was to build a cross-functional data store, which will bring all of this data virtually or together in a form which can be then delivered to the required people. So though the foundation of, or the core was cross-functional data store, the primary initial program which was taken up to build this whole virtual layer was through a governance platform. So basically we brought in the metadata from SAP, Teradata, Hadoop into a governance platform. Based on that governance platform, we were able to give a single view in terms of data access to the merchant suppliers and partners, right? And the Windwire's focus on this was, or the challenge at the point of time was the ability to pull the metadata from Hadoop system. The scanners were not available. In fact, right now you don't have it for HBase, you have it for Hive, right? So those scanners, we were able to work very jointly with the Microsoft engineering team, and we were able to build that custom scanners as part of this engagement. And we were also able to do this very quickly as a team for them to see value from this engagement, right? So they were able to, within 3 months, they were able to actually demonstrate value to the merchant suppliers, partners in terms of how they can see a single view of the data, though it's in varied forms in the existing current distributed systems, right? And though the problem was related to those specific 3 audience, this also helped them look at newer use cases. In fact, they were started looking at how to monetize data based on this new application which was built in, right? So so this is a right example in terms of where you have varied data sources and you have data issues in terms of sharing and how governance platform helps solve this, right? And at Windwire, what we have done is with these experience in terms of they working with various customers, understanding what are those considerations to ensure it's successful. We actually defined an offering called Democratize, and this offering ensures that you are able to rapidly see the value and also at lesser cost. And how it accelerates the whole process and how it's able to do it at a lesser effort is by bringing in certain aspects which is part of the toolkit. One is it can help you define the scope of the data through a survey-based model, and a maturity scoring model which is also part of the toolkit, and also a TCO and ROI model which can help you as part of the initial phase where you're defining the scope of the engagement or the plan. These three tool sets play a key role. As part of the implementation phase, our industry-specific glossary and our API toolkit will ensure that any custom scanners can be built quickly, as well as any specific industry function, especially life science, retail, and cross functions like HR finance, can be very quickly. You can jumpstart your whole glossary definition process, right? Yes, I just want to also talk about a specific offer which we have in marketplace, where we can help you realize the value of Purview very rapidly in a 3 weeks time frame. So we actually will define the scope, subdomain, which subdata domain we will work with you jointly, and then ensure that all the key features of Purview are realized within this 3 weeks time frame, and you're able to see the value. So this is something which is available in Azure Marketplace, which can be taken as an offer from Windwire. I think with this, I kind of covered the thought process, what in terms of Purview implementation needs to be looked at, right, in terms of scope, considerations, and the roadmap, and also some of the leads in terms of how to identify opportunity for a Purview. Noor?
Thanks, Pandian, and thanks, Carrie, for taking us through this wonderful session. It's really informative. I know we are close to the end of the session where we have 5 more minutes, but I do have a few questions coming in. I still request folks, if you have any questions or clarifications, please type into the chat window and we will have them answer shortly. So, Carrie, I think a couple of questions for you. I think the first question that came from Chris is, what are the business benefits of data governance? Like, why is it so critical?
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? So one of the major business benefits from data governance, right? Part of this whole thing, as I said at the beginning, right, is to move from defense to offense in the function of this, and being able to utilize your data. However, right, I also said you had to use it inside the guidelines. So one of the major benefits here, honestly, is it 2 things. One, it will save time and money of using bad data, right? So if you know that you're looking at good data that's been certified for consumption, that's a big step. Another step we don't really want to talk about, right? But a big benefit of this is you avoid liability, right? So you avoid getting hit with GDPR compliance, fines. You get hit other liability from data breaches, understanding my sensitive data, where is it? So its liability avoidance is a big factor for your business and is a big benefit of data governance when done properly. But most companies don't think of it that way. Unfortunately, most people think of data governance as a cost, and it is a cost, but you also have a huge benefit. Reputation, fine avoidance, and other functions when done properly, as well as then just the time of your resources, right? They can utilizing good data versus bad data.
Great. Thanks a lot, Carrie. I think the other follow-up question is, what could be some of the reasons for the data governance to fail in any organization?
Sure. Pandian talked about this. I talked about this in the beginning, right? Data governance is not just an IT function, right? It is a people, process, and technology. So it's very important that we look at those pieces together. And where we've most often seen this fail is when you don't get the business buy-in, right? So if we take the Field of Dreams, sorry, it's an American film reference. If we build it, they will come, right? And we've done that in a lot of cases, and we try to use that with governance as well. But if we don't get that business buy-in, right, again, because back to that, you're not using bad data, it's important that we get business buy-in because they're the ones that typically own and understand this data, right? So if they don't curate it and certify it, then we don't get that benefit, right, of using good data.
Great. I completely agree with that. Thanks a lot, Carrie. I think a couple of questions to Pandian as well. So Pandian, as you were discussing about the Azure Purview implementation, so is there any specific skill set that an organization should look at for the Purview implementation, like whether it is data engineers or BI? Can you just put some insights into that?
Yeah. I think that's a good question to look at, especially Purview being a new platform and a lot of related to data. I think people generally look at BI, data engineer skill set as a requirement. I think the good way to look at it is let's look at what are the roles Purview provides, right? So basically, you have admin roles which can help you define data sources into the system, or you have roles which will help you define the users within the system, right? So these admin roles can typically be your Azure admins who can actually do this activity. Then there are other couple of roles like data curators who actually define the assets, manage it, define policies, right, or rules for validation. So these are actually the business analysts or the functional guys who actually needs to. So data curator roles will be a business analyst kind of role, and admin collection roles will be more of Azure admins. And then your the data source and scanning component, which could be a data architect or a / data engineer kind of role, right? And recently there are roles like policy author, which again will be very close to a business analyst kind of role, and workflow administrator, which can be a data architect role. So if you're looking at the skill set required for a Purview implementation, you can broadly look at you need an Azure admin who can actually do some user profile, security related tasks, and then a data architect who can actually do the scanning, data source details, and then workflow related configurations, and then a business analyst who can actually do the data curation work. So broadly, these three skills we can look at: Azure admin, data architect, and the business analyst.
Thanks, Pandian. I know we just have 1 more minute, but I would just want to take this an important question. Is there any specific time that we should be using Apache Atlas, which you mentioned during the implementation phase?
Yeah, so I think there could be some confusion Apache Atlas, though we had few references. So you may not need to actually go into Apache Atlas as a platform to be used, because Purview gets you every functionality what Apache Atlas provides and much more, right? So the only reason when we will go for Apache Atlas is for the API to be used for ingesting metadata into the Purview platform, and that again for data sources for which at this point Purview doesn't provide support. Otherwise, you may not need to go and use Apache Atlas. And if there are any specific questions around this, we can get into further details as well.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Pandian, and thanks a lot, Carrie, for taking time to go through this very informative session on Microsoft Purview. I know we've been taking a bunch of questions, but due to the time, we will have to wrap it up. And if there are any additional questions, please write it to us at marketing@windwire.com, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. Plus, as Pandian showed, we do have the assessment is, offer the details published on the Azure Marketplace. You can reach out to us for more details on that and how we can help you with Microsoft Purview. Thanks a lot for taking time to attend this session, and I hope you find it informative. Thanks, Pandian, and thanks, Carrie, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.